The desert has a way of stripping a soul bare, leaving nothing but grit, silence, and the truth of a beating heart. Out there, under the wide sky that stretched without end, every step meant survival, and every shadow held a story yet to be told. The woman knew this better than anyone. She had carved her life out of sand and stone, alone in a place where most people dared not linger. Folks in the small towns that sat on the edge of the frontier whispered about her, some calling her stubborn, others calling her strange, but she paid no mind. She knew the desert, and the desert knew her. It was her home, harsh and unforgiving, but also filled with secrets only the patient could see. It was late afternoon when the woman first saw them. The sun was a burning coin sliding low toward the horizon, painting the rocks in crimson light. She had been gathering water from a spring tucked between jagged cliffs, her hands steady despite the fatigue of another long day, when movement caught her eye. At first she thought it was a coyote limping across the sand, but as her eyes sharpened, she saw two figures, an Apache man and a boy. The man's tall frame was bent with pain, and the child clung to his arm, half dragging him forward. Dust covered their skin, and even from a distance, she could tell the man's steps were growing weaker with each passing moment. The woman hesitated. In the desert, helping strangers was never a simple choice. The land was filled with feuds, mistrust, and dangers carried from generations of conflict. Settlers feared Apaches, Apaches feared soldiers, and blood had stained the soil too many times to count. But when her gaze shifted to the boy, small and trembling, the hesitation melted. She could not turn away. Whatever had driven them into this state, whatever dangers followed, the boy deserved a chance to see another sunrise. She hurried forward, the sand soft beneath her boots. As she reached them, the boy's wide eyes lifted to hers, dark and sharp with fear, yet heavy with hope. The man, his face lined with both age and strength, tried to push her back with a weak hand. His voice was hoarse, his words strained, but she could hear the pride and defiance buried in them. He did not want pity, and he did not want to surrender to a stranger, least of all a woman living alone in a land that was not his, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, and before he could fall, she caught his arm and steadied him. "Let me help," she said, her voice steady and calm, as if she were speaking to the desert itself. The boy's lips parted, ready to argue, but his father swayed dangerously, and the child's fear outweighed his mistrust. Together, they allowed her to lead them to her small dwelling, a rough shelter built from sun-baked clay and timber scavenged from dry riverbeds. It was no palace, but it offered shade, water, and a fighting chance. She helped the man inside, settling him down upon a woven mat. His skin was burning with fever, and his breathing was shallow, but she moved with the steady patience of someone who had faced hardship before. For hours she worked. Cleaning his wounds with herbs she gathered in secret places only she knew, forcing him to drink from her limited store of water, and whispering quiet reassurances to the boy. The child never left his father's side, his small hand gripping the older man's wrist as if by holding on he could keep him anchored to life itself. The woman did not ask questions at first. In the desert, survival came before stories. But as night fell, and the firelight flickered across the walls, the man stirred. His eyes opened, dark and fierce despite his weakness, and he studied her with suspicion. Still, there was gratitude beneath that gaze, unspoken yet undeniable. He tried to speak, but the woman hushed him, pressing a hand lightly against his shoulder. "Rest. Words can wait." The boy, however, whispered in broken phrases. They had been pursued, he said, driven from their camp by riders who carried rifles and anger in equal measure. The boy's voice shook, and though he did not say the word, the woman could hear the truth. Violence had torn their lives apart, and the desert had become their last refuge. She listened, her own heart heavy, and though she gave no promises aloud, she knew she would not let them be taken easily. Out here, alone and forgotten by the rest of the world, she had little to give but her courage and her knowledge of the land. Sometimes that was enough. Days passed. The man's strength began to return under her care, though his pride remained wounded. The boy grew more comfortable, his laughter rare but brighter than the firelight when it came. For a brief moment, their presence broke the silence of her lonely life, and she found herself watching them with a strange sense of belonging she had not felt in years. Yet beneath it all, she felt the weight of something else, something hidden. One evening, as the wind howled through the canyons and the stars spread across the sky like spilled silver, the man finally spoke more freely. His voice carried the rhythm of old stories, his words steeped in history and pain. He told her of a path through the desert that few outsiders knew, a place guarded by shadows and silence. He did not describe it fully, only hinted at its existence, but his tone carried reverence, as though he spoke of something sacred, something powerful. The woman leaned closer, her heart quickening. She had lived in the desert long enough to know that every rumor, every half-spoken tale carried a grain of truth. What he spoke of was not simply survival. It was a secret the desert had hidden for generations. But before he could say more, the boy stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the door. The woman froze, listening. At first there was nothing but the crackle of the fire. Then, faint but clear, the sound reached her ears, the distant thud of hooves against sand. Her breath caught. Someone was coming. And in that moment, with the desert night pressing close, she realized that whatever secret the Apache father carried was about to drag all of them into a storm far greater than she had imagined. The man's eyes met hers, fierce and urgent, no longer clouded with weakness. He did not need to speak for her to understand. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about something buried deep beneath the desert's silence, something men would kill to find. She rose to her feet, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, fear and fire stirred together in her chest. The desert, which had always been her ally, now seemed to hold its breath. What waited beyond the door was still hidden in shadow, but one truth was clear. By saving them, she had stepped into a story larger than her own, and there was no turning back. The sound of hooves carried through the night like a warning, faint at first, then stronger, steady and certain. The woman stood frozen by the doorway of her small dwelling, her pulse quickening in rhythm with the approaching riders. The boy clutched his father's arm, his wide eyes shimmering with fear. The Apache man, though still weak from his wounds, pushed himself upright with surprising strength. His face was hard now, his jaw tight, the look of a man who had seen danger come too many times to flinch at it. "Stay back," the woman whispered to him, though she knew words could not hold back what was coming. Her hand instinctively reached for the old rifle leaning against the wall. It was not much, a battered piece left behind from years ago, but in the desert, even a single bullet could mean the difference between life and death. The riders slowed as they neared. She could hear them speaking low to one another, their voices carrying through the still night. She dared not step outside, but her mind raced. Were they drifters, passing through by chance, or were they the very men who had driven this father and son from their home? The Apache man's eyes never left the doorway. "They are not lost," he said in a voice firm and steady despite his condition. "They are hunting." The boy's grip tightened, and the woman felt a chill spread through her bones. Hunting. That word carried a weight heavier than fear. She did not light a lamp, for light would betray them. Instead, she crouched near the doorway, peering through the cracks in the wood. The riders stopped at a distance, their silhouettes barely visible in the moonlight. She counted 3, maybe 4, their figures shifting against the horizon. They did not dismount. They waited, scanning the land as if listening for something hidden in the silence. After long minutes, the sound of hooves drifted again, this time fading into the distance. Relief brushed her chest like a passing wind, but she did not let it settle. The desert had taught her never to trust quiet after storm. She stayed awake through the night, her rifle resting across her knees, while the man and his son finally drifted into a restless sleep. Morning came with a pale sun lifting above the ridges, the air already dry and sharp. The man stirred, wincing as he shifted against the mat. His son rose quickly to help him, but he waved the boy off, determined to rise on his own. Pride ran deep in him, stronger than pain. The woman prepared what little food she had, flatbread from cornmeal and dried beans boiled soft in a clay pot. She set it before them, and though the man hesitated at first, he accepted. Hunger outweighed distrust. "You should move soon," he said quietly after the meal, his voice still hoarse but steady. "They will return." "They always do," her brow furrowed. "Who are they?" The boy glanced at his father, unsure if he should answer. The man's dark eyes rested on her as if measuring whether she was worthy of truth. Finally he spoke. "Men who dig where they should not dig. Men who search for what is not theirs." His words carried weight, but little clarity. The woman pressed gently, though she sensed his caution. "And you, what part do you play in it?" He looked toward the horizon where the desert stretched endless and untamed. "We guard what the desert keeps. My people have done so for generations. Some secrets are not meant for those who take without respect." The woman fell silent. She had heard whispers before, old tales spoken in hushed tones around campfires. Stories of hidden springs, ancient dwellings buried beneath shifting sands, places where the land itself seemed alive. Most folks dismissed them as legends meant to keep wanderers from straying too far. But now, hearing the certainty in his voice, she wondered if those tales were more than shadows. The boy, unable to hold back, spoke in a rush. "They want the canyon. They say there is something buried there. My father says it is not for them. They say it belongs to anyone who can take it." The man's stern look silenced him, but the words had already taken root. The canyon. The woman knew of many canyons, each with their own danger and beauty. But his tone suggested one canyon in particular, a place far from the paths most dared to walk. She studied the man. His face was worn by hardship, his body scarred from battles seen and unseen. Yet there was a strength in him that had nothing to do with muscle. He carried knowledge, history passed down like a flame kept alive against the wind. That knowledge was a burden, and now, by helping him, she had stepped into its shadow. As the day passed, she worked outside, tending to her small patch of crops and checking the traps she set for rabbits. The desert was stingy with its gifts, but she had learned to coax what she needed. Still, her eyes drifted often to the ridges, searching for any sign of riders. Each time she saw only sand and sky, but her chest carried the weight of waiting. Inside, the boy explored her modest home, touching the woven baskets, the jars filled with dried herbs, the old books she had salvaged long ago. His curiosity was unguarded, his laughter rare but warm when it slipped free. She found herself watching him with a quiet ache. Once, long ago, she had dreamed of children. Life had taken that dream from her, but the sight of this boy stirred a softness she had buried deep. By evening, the man had regained more of his strength. He stepped outside, moving slowly but firmly, and stood looking across the desert. "This land remembers," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Every stone, every shadow. It keeps what is given to it, and it punishes those who take without asking." The woman joined him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "And what is it keeping that men would risk so much for?" He turned to her, his gaze heavy with unspoken meaning. "Something older than their greed. Something they cannot understand." His words sent a shiver through her. She wanted to press him for more, but his silence told her she had reached the edge of what he was willing to share, for now. That night, as the fire crackled low, she found herself lying awake again. The boy slept soundly, curled against his father's side, but she could not rest. The echo of hooves still lingered in her ears, and the man's words circled her thoughts. She remembered stories told by travelers years ago, rumors of a canyon where the rocks held markings no one could read, where springs flowed even in the driest years, where the wind carried whispers if you listened long enough. Most dismissed such stories as tricks of imagination, but the desert woman had lived long enough to know the land hid truths stranger than any tale. The more she thought, the more she realized what had begun. By pulling that man and his son from the edge of death, she had tied herself to their fate. And their fate was no small matter. It was tangled with secrets as deep as the desert itself, secrets that men would kill to uncover. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping sand against the walls with a restless hiss. She closed her eyes, but rest did not come. Somewhere out there, riders were waiting, watching, searching. Somewhere beyond the ridges, a canyon held a secret that had survived longer than memory. And now, whether she wished it or not, the desert woman was part of its story. The days that followed were heavy with unease, though nothing stirred on the ridges. The woman went about her work with practiced calm, tending to the few animals she kept, gathering water from the spring and checking her traps. Outwardly, her life looked the same as it always had. Yet beneath that rhythm ran a tension she could not shake, like the steady hum of a storm waiting beyond the horizon. She had taken in the father and son, but with them had come a shadow that stretched across her home, and she knew the desert was not done testing her. The Apache man grew stronger each day, though the limp in his stride lingered as a reminder of the wounds he carried. The boy remained close to him, watchful and wary, yet his youthful curiosity often got the better of him. He asked questions about everything, the tools she used, the plants she gathered, even the strange books with worn covers on her shelf. The woman found herself answering with patience she did not know she still had, surprised by how easily his presence filled the silence she had lived with for so long. But it was the man who kept her thoughts restless. He spoke little, yet when he did, every word carried weight. He spoke of the land with reverence, of the wind and stones as if they were living kin. He watched the sky at night, murmuring prayers the woman could not understand, and when his eyes swept the desert, it was as though he saw more than what lay before them. She began to understand why others might fear him, but she also began to understand his strength came from something deeper than muscle or will. On the fourth evening, as they sat around the fire, she asked again about the canyon. His gaze flicked to her, sharp and guarded, but he did not turn away this time. "There are places the desert hides," he said. "Places older than the oldest stories. My people were chosen to protect them, not to own, not to use, only to guard." The woman studied him, the flames casting shadows across his face. "And the men hunting you, what do they want with it?" His jaw tightened. "They want to take what should not be taken. Gold, stones, water, whatever their eyes see, they call it theirs. But there are things the earth buries for a reason, things that should not be woken." The boy shifted uneasily, his eyes flicking toward the door. The woman followed his glance, and though the night was still, she felt the weight of his fear settle in her chest. The next morning, before the sun rose fully, she saddled her horse. She told the boy she was checking her traps, but in truth she needed to see for herself what lay beyond the ridges. The Apache man did not stop her, though his eyes lingered on her as if he knew her intent. His silence was permission, or perhaps it was a warning. She rode hard across the sand, the cool morning wind biting against her skin. The desert stretched endless before her, yet she felt pulled, as though her horse knew the way. After an hour, she reached a narrow pass cut between cliffs. She had passed it before in her wanderings, but never had she ventured inside. Today, something drew her onward. The canyon was quiet, the air heavy, as though sound itself hesitated to linger. The rocks towered high, their faces etched with markings that looked too precise to be carved by wind alone. She dismounted, running her fingers across the grooves. Some looked like symbols, others like maps, though none she could read. As she moved deeper, she found a spring trickling from the stone, its water clear and cold. Life clung stubbornly around it. Green plants, small tracks of animals, even the flutter of a bird's wings. In a land where water was more precious than gold, this spring was a treasure worth fighting for, but it was not the water that unsettled her. It was the silence. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, and though the sun burned above, a chill crept along her spine. She felt watched, though she was alone. When she returned home, dust clinging to her boots, the man was waiting. He looked at her, and without a word she knew he understood where she had been. His eyes held no anger, only a quiet sadness. "Now you have seen," he said. She wanted to ask what it meant, but before she could, the boy rushed in, breathless. "Riders," he whispered. "I saw them near the ridge." Her stomach tightened. She grabbed the rifle, her hands steady despite the rush of her heart. The man rose as well, leaning heavily on his son for support. Together, they waited at the doorway, the boy's small frame pressed between them. The riders did not approach directly. They circled in the distance, their figures small against the horizon. She counted 4 this time, maybe 5. They lingered long enough to make their presence known, then turned and vanished back into the desert. It was a warning. That night, tension filled the small dwelling. The boy barely touched his food, his eyes darting toward the door with every gust of wind. The woman sat close to the fire, her rifle across her knees, while the man watched the flames in silence. "They will come again," he said finally. "And they will not only circle next time," the woman met his gaze. "Then tell me what they want so I know what we're fighting for." He was quiet for a long time. At last he spoke, his voice low. "Long ago, before my people, others walked this desert. They left behind what should have stayed buried. The canyon is their resting place. Those men believe it holds riches, but it holds something greater and far more dangerous." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask what danger, but the look in his eyes silenced her. Whatever it was, he believed it with every fiber of his being. The days that followed became a waiting game. The woman tended her land, the boy shadowed her steps, and the man grew stronger, though his limp remained. Yet the presence of the riders pressed in on them like heat before a storm. Each evening, they saw movement on the horizon, flashes of light, the distant glint of rifles catching the sun. The men were not hiding. They wanted to be seen. At night, when the boy finally slept, the woman and the man spoke in hushed tones. He told her of battles fought in years past, of raids and broken promises, of blood spilled across the sand. She told him of her own losses, of how the desert had taken all she once loved and left her with only solitude. In their shared silence, they found an understanding neither had expected. Yet even in those quiet moments, the shadow of the canyon lingered. She could not shake the feeling that by stepping into that place, she had crossed a line. The desert had shown her something, and now it demanded something in return. One night, as the stars burned cold above, she woke to the sound of voices outside. She rose silently, rifle in hand, and moved to the doorway. The man was already there, his eyes sharp, his body tense. Together they listened. The voices were low, speaking in words she could not make out, but they were close. Too close. Her heart pounded, but she did not move. After a long moment, the voices faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of hooves retreating into the night. The boy stirred in his sleep, whispering his father's name. The man placed a hand gently on his shoulder, calming him without words. The woman lowered her rifle, but her hands trembled. The riders were no longer circling at a distance. They were probing, testing, waiting for their moment. And when that moment came, she knew the desert would not let her stand aside. She had chosen her path the moment she carried the man and his son into her home. Now the land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The days that followed pressed down heavy, like the desert sky before a storm. The riders were no longer shadows at the edge of the land. They were bold now, drifting near in daylight, leaving tracks close enough that the woman could see the imprint of horseshoes in the sand. They wanted her to know they were there. Each time she walked to the spring or tended her small patch of crops, she felt their eyes on her, even when she could not see them. The boy clung to her side more often than not, and though she tried to keep her steps steady, her chest tightened with every glance toward the horizon. The Apache man, stronger now, though, still marked by his limp, stood watch in the evenings. He spoke little, his gaze fixed on the ridges. When she pressed him for details, for what exactly the men were after, he gave her the same words. The canyon must remain untouched. It was not enough for her, but the weight in his voice told her it was all he was willing to share. His silence was both a shield and a burden. That silence began to gnaw at her. She had risked everything by helping them, and now her home was no longer just her own. She needed to understand what was at stake, and why these riders were willing to circle like wolves for days without striking. One morning, before the sun burned high, she saddled her horse again. The boy stirred from sleep, his eyes wide with worry, but she hushed him gently. "I'll be back before the heat." The Apache man did not stop her. His gaze followed her as she rode out, but he said nothing. She took that as a sign that he knew what she intended. Her path carried her toward the canyon once more. This time she did not stop at the spring. She pushed deeper, her horse's hooves echoing faintly against the stone walls. The air grew cooler as the cliffs rose high above, shutting out the sun. She dismounted, leading the animal by its reins, and stepped slowly forward. The silence was thicker here, as if the canyon itself was listening. She saw more markings carved into the stone, some faint with age, others deep and sharp as though freshly cut. Shapes she could not understand, lines that twisted into patterns that tugged at her eyes. She felt both drawn and unsettled. There was something here, something older than memory. At the heart of the canyon, she found a hollow in the rock, wide and dark, half hidden by brush. The air that drifted from it was cool and damp, carrying a smell unlike the dry desert. She crouched low, brushing away sand at the entrance, and her fingers struck stone that felt different from the cliff walls. Smooth-shaped, not natural. Her breath caught, and she pulled her hand back as if burned. A sudden sound made her freeze. Hooves distant but closing fast. She moved quickly, leading her horse back through the narrow path. Her pulse hammered as she pressed against the rock wall, straining to listen. The riders passed close, their voices low, their laughter sharp. She could hear the metallic jingle of bridles, the scrape of hooves on stone. They did not see her, but their presence inside the canyon filled her with dread. They were not wandering anymore. They knew where to look. She waited until they passed, then hurried out, her mind racing. By the time she reached her home, the Apache man was standing outside, his face hard. He read the truth in her eyes before she spoke. "You saw," he said flatly. She nodded. "There's something there. Not just water, not just rock. What is it?" His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice came low, edged with sorrow. "It is a place of the old ones. What they left behind should not be touched. We guard it because if it is taken, it will bring ruin. Not just to us, but to all who live here." The boy watched silently, his young face pinched with fear. The woman felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. It was no longer just her home at stake. The land itself seemed to hang in balance. That night, the riders came closer than ever before. She woke to the sound of voices outside, not distant but just beyond the door. The Apache man was already on his feet, his hand gripping a long knife. The boy huddled near the fire, wide-eyed and trembling. The woman raised her rifle, her breath quick and shallow. The voices grew louder, mocking, calling out to the darkness. They knew someone was inside. They were taunting, daring them to step out. She held her ground, refusing to move, but her heart pounded so hard she feared they would hear it. After long minutes, the riders pulled back, their laughter fading into the night. But their message was clear. They would not wait much longer. The next day, the woman prepared quietly. She gathered food, filled water skins, checked her rifle, and sharpened the small knife she kept hidden in her boot. The Apache man watched her without comment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "They will come. When they do, you must be ready to choose. Stand with us or stand aside." She met his gaze. "I already chose when I brought you here." For the first time, his stern face softened. A small nod, nothing more, but enough to bind them in unspoken trust. The tension grew with each passing hour. The boy grew restless, flinching at every sound. She tried to soothe him, telling him stories of her own past, of times when the desert had tested her and she had endured. It calmed him, but only for a while. Even his laughter, when it came, felt like a fragile thing, ready to shatter at the first echo of hooves. By evening, the sky burned red with sunset, the air thick and still. She stood at the doorway scanning the horizon. Dust rose in the distance, moving fast. Riders. This time they were not circling, not watching. They were coming straight for her home. Her chest tightened, but she did not move from her place. The Apache man stood beside her, knife in hand, his posture steady. The boy clung to the shadows, his small frame pressed against the wall. The riders drew closer, their silhouettes sharp against the dying light. She counted 6 now, not 4, not 5. Their numbers had grown. Each carried a rifle, the barrels catching the last of the sun. Their horses kicked up sand in heavy clouds, the sound of their charge rolling like thunder. The woman gripped her rifle tighter, her knuckles white. She felt the weight of every choice she had made press down on her in that moment. If she had turned away when she first saw them in the desert, her home would still be her own, untouched by this storm. But she had not. And now the desert demanded that she stand. The Apache man's voice came low, calm despite the danger. The canyon must not be theirs. No matter the cost, she nodded, her throat tight, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders. The boy pressed closer, whispering his father's name, his voice trembling with fear. The riders slowed as they neared, fanning out to surround the dwelling. Their leader, a tall figure with a broad hat, raised his hand, signaling the others to hold. For a long, tense moment, silence stretched between them. Then his voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "You have something that belongs to us. Hand it over and no blood needs to spill." The woman's breath caught. She glanced at the Apache man, but his eyes remained fixed on the riders. His silence was his answer. The leader's voice hardened. "You think you can keep it? You think the desert will hide you? We'll take it one way or another." The woman raised her rifle slowly, her arms steady. She did not fire, not yet. But the message was clear. She would not surrender. The riders shifted, tension crackling in the air. Hands moved to rifles, horses stamped restlessly. The sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand. In that moment, the desert itself seemed to hold still, waiting. The woman felt the weight of the canyon, of the secret buried within it, pressing down on her. The storm had come to her doorstep, and the first strike was only a breath away. The desert held its breath as the riders sat on their restless horses, their eyes fixed on the small clay dwelling. The woman felt her rifle heavy in her hands, the wood pressing into her shoulder. The Apache man stood beside her, his knife gleaming faintly in the fading light, and the boy huddled in the corner, his wide eyes locked on the figures circling outside. The air was so tight with silence, it seemed even the fire dared not crackle. The leader's voice cut through the stillness again, steady and certain. "This is your last chance. Step aside. The canyon belongs to us now." The woman's heart pounded, but she refused to lower her rifle. She had not asked for this fight, but she knew the moment she had brought the man and his son into her home that her life would no longer be untouched. The canyon's secret was no longer only theirs to guard. It was hers too, for she had seen it, felt its weight in the stone and silence. The Apache man spoke, his voice strong though his body still bore scars. "The desert does not belong to you. What you seek will destroy you." His words only seemed to fuel the riders' anger. The leader spat into the sand and gestured sharply. The circle tightened, rifles shifting into ready hands. The woman braced herself, her finger brushing the trigger, knowing the next breath could decide everything. Then came a sound that stopped them all. A low rumble, deep beneath the earth. Faint at first, but growing stronger. The horses snorted nervously, shifting in place, their ears flicking back. The riders glanced at one another, unease flickering across their faces. The Apache man's eyes narrowed. He looked toward the distant ridges, and the woman followed his gaze. The ground trembled again, and from the canyon a gust of wind rose, cold and sharp, carrying a strange, hollow sound like voices carried on the air. The riders stiffened. Some crossed themselves, others cursed under their breath. The leader barked an order, trying to steady them, but the desert was no longer theirs to command. The horses grew restless, stamping and pulling against their reins. The sound from the canyon deepened, echoing across the sand like a warning too old for words. The Apache man stepped forward, his voice rising in a chant, low and steady. Ancient words the woman did not understand. The boy clutched his arm, his fear softening into awe. The woman watched, her chest tight as the riders shifted uneasily, their courage faltering under something they could not explain. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rumble stilled. The canyon was silent again, the air heavy, the desert waiting. The leader's face hardened, but doubt now shadowed his eyes. He lifted his rifle, aiming directly at the Apache man. Before he could fire, the woman raised her own rifle and let off a single shot. The bullet struck the sand just inches from his horse's hooves, the crack of the gunfire splitting the night. The horse reared, throwing the leader off balance. Chaos erupted. The riders struggled to steady their mounts, their nerves already frayed by the strange power of the canyon. The Apache man shouted words in his own tongue, his voice carrying with a force that seemed to ride the wind itself. The boy stood at his side, no longer trembling, his small hands gripping the knife his father had given him. The riders pulled back, shouting at one another, their circle breaking. They had come expecting an easy fight, but the desert had shown them otherwise. Between the trembling earth, the voices in the wind, and the woman's unwavering aim, they no longer saw victory waiting here. They saw something older, something that did not belong to them. One by one, they turned their horses, kicking up sand as they rode hard into the darkness. The leader was the last to leave, his face twisted with rage and pride, but even he pulled back, his figure swallowed by the desert night. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of the wind. The woman lowered her rifle slowly, her arms heavy. The Apache man breathed deeply, his shoulders sagging with both exhaustion and relief. The boy's small hand slipped into his, gripping tight. For a long time, none of them spoke. The woman felt her heartbeat steady, though the tension still lingered in her chest. She knew the riders might return, perhaps with more men, perhaps with greater anger. But for now, they were safe. When the man finally spoke, his voice was quiet, filled with the weight of what had passed. The desert protects its own. It will not let them take what is not theirs. The woman looked at him, her rifle still resting in her hands. And what of us? What part do we play now? His eyes met hers, steady and dark. You have seen. That makes you a guardian, whether you wished it or not. Her throat tightened at his words. She had always lived in the desert as a survivor, taking only what she needed, asking nothing in return. But now the desert had given her something greater. It had trusted her with its secret, bound her fate to it. She understood then that she could no longer live only for herself. The boy leaned against her side, his tired eyes lifting to hers. Will they come back? He asked softly. She crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Maybe, she admitted. But if they do, they'll find us ready. The boy nodded, his small chest lifting with quiet courage. The Apache man placed a hand on his shoulder, and the woman saw in his eyes the same fierce determination she now felt. The days that followed were calmer, though the tension never fully left. The riders did not return, at least not right away. The woman tended her land as she always had, but now she did so with new purpose. The boy helped her, his laughter more frequent, his steps lighter. The Apache man, though his limp remained, grew stronger each day, his presence steady beside her. Together they watched the horizon, knowing the desert secret still stirred in the canyon, waiting, guarding. They spoke little of it, for words could not change what they already knew. The desert had chosen them, tied their lives to its silence and its power. In the evenings, as the sun bled into the horizon, the woman often stood at the doorway of her home, the firelight flickering behind her. She thought of the riders, of their hunger for what was never meant to be theirs, and of the canyon's warning. She thought of her own choice, the moment she reached out her hand to a stranger and his son in need. That choice had changed everything. She did not regret it. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had always been her companion. Now it had given her a family she had not expected and a purpose she had never imagined. It had shown her that survival was not enough. Some things were worth guarding, worth standing for, no matter the cost. One night, as the stars burned cold and bright, the Apache man sat beside her, his voice quiet but certain. The desert remembers. When we are gone, it will still hold its secrets. But for now, it is ours to protect. She nodded, her gaze sweeping across the endless sand. The boy's laughter drifted from inside, warm and bright, a sound that cut through the stillness like a promise. The woman breathed deeply, the air dry and sharp, the desert stretching wide and silent around her. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. She felt the land's weight and its trust. She felt her own strength, tested and tempered. And she knew, as the stars wheeled above, that whatever storms might come, she would stand her ground. The desert had given her a place, a purpose, and a bond stronger than fear. It had given her a story to carry, one that would not be broken by greed or silence. The secret of the canyon remained, hidden and waiting, but the woman no longer feared it. She was part of it now, bound to its mystery, tied to its truth. And as long as she drew breath, the desert's secret would remain safe in the hands of those who understood its worth. The desert stretched on, endless and eternal, holding its silence close. But within that silence, the woman had found something greater than survival. She had found belonging, she had found trust, and she had found the strength to guard what mattered most. And so the desert woman, the Apache father, and his son lived on, their lives woven into the land's story, their footsteps carried by the sand, their voices joining the whispers of the wind. The riders might return, greed might stir again, but the desert would endure, and so would they. In the heart of the desert, where the winds sang through the canyons and the stars lit the endless sky, a secret remained safe, not because it was hidden, but because there were still those willing to protect it.